Hello and welcome to episode number 32 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and as per usual, a ton to talk about today. Before we get into it here, please make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news by featured guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me than I could put into words. And every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, etc., Puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules here, just making sure you are in the know. If you prefer listening to podcasts on YouTube, search Chel Squared Podcast, and the show is there too. We're circling in on the newest chapter of the circus that is the Edmonton Oilers. Finally, they had the decency to fire general manager Peter Chiarelli. Few years too late, but hey, better late than never, I guess. But they didn't just fire him. According to multiple reports, they fired him in the second intermission of the Oilers or Red Wings game so he could leave the arena without being bombarded. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Did you think the Oilers were going to suddenly fix themselves during the game? I mean, why wait until the second intermission to do it? The Oilers can't even fire people correctly. What is going on in Edmonton? Not only that, but according to Mark Spector of Sportsnet, the 3-year extension Chiarelli gave Koskinen just days before prior to his firing was negotiated between himself and Koskinen's agent. No one else from the team weighed in on this decision. Apparently, they approved it. But if you're upper management in Edmonton and you're thinking about firing your general manager, how could you let this happen? 30 years old, first year back in the NHL since 2011, first year playing in North America since 2012 for Koskinen, 2.79 goals against average, .910 save percentage as he splits time with quasi-starter backup former Rangers legend Cam Talbot, 1.51 goals saved above average in the 28 total appearances this season, 25 of which were starts. You give him a 3-year, $4.5 per million per year extension? Are you out of your mind? The Oilers are 5 points ahead of the Kings for dead last in the Western Conference, and they currently have around $50,000 in cap space according to Cap Friendly. $50,000. We'll talk about how Edmonton could try to get out of the cap hell they're in. Big emphasis on try, because Edmonton's a mess. We'll give Chiarelli's trade history a eulogy, talk what can Edmonton do now to get out of this mess if they can, if they'll finally give McDavid some offensive help instead of trading players that were actually scoring for a piece of toast, cough, cough, Drake, Kajula, cough, cough. Discuss Talbot's trade value, both in the trade market and in free agency. He's 31 years old, making just under $4.2 million this season. Contract expires in July. Not having a great year, to put it lightly, but who is in Edmonton besides number 97? We'll talk about all of that, the poll question, and a whole lot more. Joining me today is Oilers writer, currently on hiatus, but is still willing to give me his 2 cents, Shane Sanders. Shane, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you, man?
I'm doing fantastic. So before we get into the super nitty-gritty here, take me through your thoughts and emotions when you saw the news that Chiarelli was finally let go. Be honest, how big was the smile on your face?
I think there was a big, giant sense of relief from a lot of the Oilers fan base, just from the perspective that this has been a long time coming. And this has been something that started to kind of raise a red flag the moment that Taylor Hall trade happened in the summer of 2016. That trade happened, and that kind of triggered the downfall of Chiarelli slowly as time went on for him. You look at some of the deals that he went through from the team that he inherited, and it's just dismantled itself from one move right after the other. When he came in here, he wanted to build a heavy team that was reminiscent of that Boston Bruins team that won the Cup in 2011, and also what the Kings did in their 2 Stanley Cup wins in the years after. But during that time is that you've seen where Chiarelli got hired on to take over with the Oilers in the 2015. That's when you started to see that shift in the league, where you weren't seeing heavy hockey winning hockey games anymore. You were seeing speed, skill, and the emphasis on playing a 5-man unit system. the Oilers, just from a construction standpoint, were just being made the wrong way. And you could see that, and it was just going back to the wall and just beating your head repetitively with the same moves that he did. So you look at where the Eberle trade happened, which is another, it's another frustrating move for the fan base that's been suffering for almost 15 years now without having much success in the playoffs. You're looking at a team that's potentially staring down the barrel of making the playoffs for 1 in 13 tries over the last 13 years. That's pretty abysmal when you look at the track record overall. Eberle for Strome becomes Spooner, becomes waivers, becomes buried in the minors, becomes a potential buyout in the offseason. That's not a good look for the Oilers. You look at where the Caggiula trade happened. Caggiula, not exactly your top 6 player. He's a bottom 6 guy that can kind of punch above his weight for a couple of games here and there, but more so suited as a 4th line energy guy. You ended up dumping him for Brandon Manning, who wasn't even a regular in the Chicago Blackhawks lineup. I think he was scratched 14 times before he even got traded to Edmonton. So you traded a regular roster player who can potentially score you about 10 goals a year, and you're dumping him off for a defenseman that's got a very negative 5-on-5 goals differential, and a guy that can't even be a regular in your lineup. So you just look at where all these moves are going. That team that Chiarelli inherited, and the running joke that if he literally did nothing, that this team would have been way better and far more set up for success than the team that he's put together now, and where this team is with the cap problems, the roster construction, the immovable contracts, and what a backward step that this team has taken in 4 years. If you had told any Oiler fan back in June 2015 when Connor McDavid was on that podium and you whispered in the ear, yeah, but they're still going to miss the playoffs in 3 out of the first 4 years that you're going to have McDavid, they would have laughed at you. No one's laughing today.
I think you're absolutely right. And also, what did you think of the report that he got fired in the second intermission of a game? I mean, in my opinion, right, if you have this thought process that, okay, we're going to fire the general manager, and it's been approved by everybody in upper management and yada yada, why do it in the middle of a game? I get doing it in the second intermission to let him leave before everyone else does, but at the same time, if you knew you were going to do it, I mean, why wait until there's a game going on to pull the trigger here? I mean, if you knew you were going to do it, it's not like the Oilers were going to just suddenly wake up and play this game like the cup contenders that they aren't. So, and if they did play that well, you're playing Detroit. They weren't playing the Lightning. They weren't playing, I guess now you can see the Islanders, because the Islanders have been playing super well over the past couple of months. I mean, they weren't playing a Stanley Cup contender anyway. So even if they did win that game, even if they were playing well, I don't know why you have to fire him in the middle of a game to do it. I mean, if you're going to do it before the game. If anything, it's Detroit here. It's not the Lightning, and it's not a cup contender. Why do it in the second intermission of a game? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think that perfectly sums up management in Edmonton over the past decade and a half now.
Yeah, and it's going to go down as in Oilers folklore as just one of the more peculiar things. This goes back to them firing Ralph Kruger over Skype. Back a few years ago, just before they hired Dallas Eakins.
Right, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't.
So that happened, and then you had the McClellan firing, where that happened, where they, he gets onto the plane, he flies to San Jose for the road trip. It's like a week-long road trip that the Oilers are on, and the first stop is San Jose. They get to San Jose, and they relieve him of his duties just as they're getting off the plane. And so that was another one that's going to be a peculiar one. And then now you've got a one where you're firing a GM in the second intermission, or you're at least informing him in the second intermission that you're going to be relieving him of his duties. Now, the one that kind of will stick in my craw will always be the Skype interview with with Ralph Kruger. I know it was a logistical thing, but I think that you at least owe someone the decency to at least have a in-person conversation with them, especially with the magnitude of what sports franchises kind of run through. It's no just small pickles chop, right? The McClellan thing, you have to look at the backstory. He's got family that was in San Jose. He kind of knew that this was going to be coming. It was coming down the pipe eventually. He was saved from his job in April of last year during the end of season when they were doing their audit, and they said, you know what, we're going to bring him back for another year. But going into the year, everybody knew that he was on the chopping block, and I think that Todd McClellan, in all fairness, if you were to ask him, knew that, hey, you know what, my job was on the line. And if I wasn't going to be in a playoff spot by the quarter pole of the season, I knew that I was going to be getting the axe. Well, you look at everything together and you try to make some sense out of this. Maybe that firing was just to, get him off the plane in San Jose where he's going to be with his family and whatnot. So the transition is a little bit easier. It's just the timing of it, just how it worked out. The Chiarelli one, they made a decision before the game even started that they were going to go in this direction. And so it was a little odd that this was being done during the middle of the game, but I could understand in Nicholson's perspective that he's trying to get this done as quietly as possible so that he can allow Chiarelli to leave while the fans are, currently shouting and chanting, "Fire Chiarelli," during the later end of that second period and into the third period. I was going to be an angry mob as soon as they left because Edmonton's been burning like a little tinderbox right now. So it's just what takes one little spark, one loss that'll just tip people because that's where the frustration is at right now. So I think they were just trying to give him the decency of just trying to get him out. Not that I'm trying to defend the move at all. It's also one of those things where you're trying not to cause a distraction before the game by firing him, or have the players, you fire them in the morning, and then now you have the players sending them out in front of the media, and the media is asking these guys, how do you feel about the Chiarelli firing? Where do you see this franchise going? And you're taking these guys off the focus of picking up 2 points with a tight playoff race in the West, where you've got multiple teams from 6th all the way down to 13th, and you're separated by 6 or 7 points. That's a tight race. You want to have all that focus on picking up those 2 points. Having to go and focus and answer questions and in the middle saying, hey, you know what, the GM got fired, who's next? Am I going? That's going to take away from some of the focus. But doing this in the middle of the game, peculiar thing, but I can understand some of the reasoning as to why it happened.
In retrospective, the McClellan firing, right? They fired McClellan, they brought in Hitchcock. They went on a little bit of a winning streak, and now they're pretty much back to square one. They lost 3 in a row. They're 4-6 in the last 10 games. They under 500 again. I mean, was the McClellan firing, do you think, in your opinion, reasonable, or was this more of a coaching problem? Was it a general manager / team construction problem?
This, all in all, there's multiple issues that are fabricating the Oilers right now, from the top all the way down to the players. You look at the fact that they did fire McClellan when they did. I think that was a necessary move. That was the move that Chiarelli had, that was going to be his one card that he could pull before they eventually pull the plug on him, is that he had a chance to make a coaching change. Well, when after McClellan was gone, Hitchcock comes in. Hitchcock does an unbelievable job. I believe it was the Oilers won something like 9-2-1, and is just right out of the hopper with Hitchcock. They're playing some of the best hockey that they've played all year. They're playing 5-man systems unit, but along the way, December 11th happens, and you lose Oscar Klefbom, who it's debatable for a lot of people whether or not that they truly believe that Klefbom is the number one defenseman in the NHL. But you look at the impact that Klefbom's had on this Oilers club, and that in itself, a guy that's getting you over 35 to 40 points is, I think, where he was projecting at that point. He was playing plus 20 minutes a game. Some nights, there were nights where Klefbom was teetering on 30 minutes a night, playing PK 5-on-5 and on power play. Now, after losing Clefbaum, I think the Oilers have gone something like 6-12-1 without him. So that's a major blow for this franchise. And you look at some of the save percentage issues that have happened with the goaltending with Talbot and with Koskinen, who's now the Oilers' de facto number one. Both of those guys have seen a hit in their save percentage because they don't have that top number one defenseman that's playing for them. They've got youngsters that are coming on. They've got Brandon Manning now. They've got Alex Petrovic, and they've got Matt Benning that are, three of the Oilers' weaker D, and those are the guys that are now tasked with picking up a couple extra minutes here and there. And then when they're underperforming, you're overtasking your top end guys with Darnell Nurse and Adam Larson, and they're starting to show some strain. So you look at the way that everything's kind of happened with this club. You've already lost almost I think over like 110 games man lost this year due to injury and Clefbaum and Sekera are both eating up a huge chunk of that time off. So the injuries aren't helping on the back end, which is then causing a problem in goal because your goalies aren't able to stop the pucks because they don't have any reliable defenseman in front of them to actually clear the net and make their job a little bit easier. You're having to see Koskinen dive and fight and just to make a couple of saves to keep a team in a hockey game. And then you look, the team now is starting to unravel from the offensives, from the forwards, I should say, because the forwards aren't committing to playing defense because they're getting worn out as well. So everything here, you just look at, it's just the things are just starting to unravel, and you look at everything and you add it all up. It's because the team's not competing hard enough. They're slow. So being slow makes you pick up a lot of penalties because you're trailing the play a lot. So if you don't have control of the puck in a puck possession league now, and you're having to go back out and chase the puck, you're more likely to pick up penalties. You're more likely to be on the PK. You're more likely to get scored upon. And then your goals differential decreases. It's one issue that feeds right into the next, and into the next. So is this a coaching issue? Or is this a roster construction issue? This is a roster construction issue. This team is too slow, and just everything else that I just told you. There needs to be some wholesale changes here, but there is a team here that can win with some of the pieces that they have.
By the way, I love how when you were listing the defensemen the Oilers have, you didn't mention Chris Russell. I think that's fantastic because he's so bad that you didn't even want to mention him in the list of defensemen. I think that is glorious. I think that's fantastic.
Well, no, actually, you know what? I'll correct you on that. If you look at the competitive level of this Oilers hockey club, and you look at some of those guys that I mentioned, Petrovic, Manning, Benning, and those guys are in your 6, 5, and 4 spot right now. Those guys are not very good at all, and they do not. The issue that they all share in nature together is that they're just not competing hard enough. The reason why I didn't mention Chris Russell in that is because Chris Russell is a guy that does compete. So I know that Chris Russell gets a lot of flack from around the league, but it's a necessary guy that you need to have that is effective when he plays in that 5 spot. So Chris Russell is a number 5 defenseman, awesome addition to your team. Chris Russell at $4 million trying to play in the top 4, I can understand where the struggle is, but you need a guy like that that's going to compete and actually give you his hardest, whether or not there's going to be some games where he's not going to be at the top of his level. But Chris Russell in itself, he is a guy that will go out there and compete. And in all reality is that the Oilers need more guys that are as competitive and have that spirit of just getting in front of pucks, blocking shots, doing whatever you can for your teammates so you can win. I know that Chris Russell gets a lot of flack around the league, but I can understand his merit on this team, and I can understand from a roster construction perspective and where this Oilers club is of why he is so integral to this team.
Speaking of goaltending, you mentioned the goaltending struggles. What did you think of the Koskinen contract extension? Because as I said in the opening, I mean, he hasn't played in the NHL since 2011, hasn't played in North America since 2012. This is his first season back. He was on a $2.5 million deal for one season, and Chiarelli in a last ditch, or I don't even know what kind of what kind of move this was, but a $4.5 million per year contract for 3 years for Mikko Koskinen. I mean, you've watched him more than I have, so maybe you like this. Maybe you like this deal more than I do. But I am not a huge fan of this deal, only because if you want to give him 3 years and he's your de facto starter, that's one thing. But his numbers don't scream starter at me, and a $4.5 million tag kind of seems like a lot. But again, if this is your de facto starter and Talbot's gone at the end of the year, then it could be worse, I guess. I mean, what did you think of the Koskinen deal when you first heard about it?
So I think that assessment it is fair. 4.5 million times 3 years, and I believe he's got a no move clause.
No move clause, yeah.
It's worrisome because of the fact that you have such a variance in Koskinen's game from what his absolute high side is, which is true. That his high side is a number one goalie that can have a play with a heavy workload. The low side of him, though, is troublesome. And where you get with this is just that there is such a variance from high to low that it's too inconsistent to really find what you really have in this goalie. A 27 game window is it's a short window to actually look and see what you have with this guy. But it seems as if Nicholson and Hitchcock, who's a huge fan of Koskinen, they seem like they've seen enough right now, and they know what his high side potential is, and they believe in the player that he can be their guy. Now, you watch Koskinen on a day-to-day basis here. There's a lot of things that are fair in assessment for a comparison for Anders Nilsson, and I'm going to tell you why in a couple seconds here. So, when coming out of the KHL, both goalies came in, they joined the NHL, they joined the Oilers early, and early on in the year, October and November, both of them were unreal. Both of them took the net from Talbot. So we're talking Nilsson in 2015-16, and we're talking Koskinen here this year in 18-19. Nilsson came in, took the net from Koskinen, but as the year went on, Talbot got his legs under him, and he ended up winning back his number one job. And Nilsson, at the same time, concurrently, started playing the worst hockey of the year, game after game after game, and just became this gradual decline in his performance. And so at the end of the year, what did they? They sent him to the minors, and at the end of the year, he was gone. Koskinen, excellent through October, good and very, very good in November. Ended up at the end of walking into December, we were looking at a goalie that was top 5 in goals against and top 5 in save percentage. And he was playing some of the best hockey of his career. Now you coincide that Klefbom injury, and then you look at where the Oilers are now, and it's been a slow decline downwards. The hope that you can have with this $4.5 million cap hit is just that you have seen what the high side is with this goalie. And if you factor out the injuries and you strengthen the defense that's in front of him, maybe he can maintain that high side. And that maybe he can be a quality number one goalie. The issues that I do have with Koskinen is that there are some times where he does start to play a little bit smaller than what he actually is. There's a 6'7" goaltender we're talking about. And there's games where he only looks like he's given up a lot of space in the net. He's allowing pucks to go through him. His game, all in all, it is starting to get a little bit better. Those holes are starting to disappear. But the thing that drives him, and I believe that this is another big reason of why Nicholson and Hitchcock are big fans for Koskinen, just his compete level. He doesn't give up on a play. You could see, like, as the last 2 years have gone on, something's going on with Tam Talbot here. It seems as if his confidence is completely eroded. You'll see him hanging his head after a goal. You'll see him you can see the facial expression. You walk in after, you listen to his post-game press conferences, you just read his body language. Something's eroded here with this guy's confidence. It hasn't happened with Koskinen yet, but it's a peculiar move because I truly do believe that they could have waited a little bit longer, maybe until the end of the year to make this deal official. because yes, 4.5 million is kind of what you're going to be paying for a starting goalie. Like even look at what the Coyotes did with Rantanen, or Ranta, I should say. Ranta got a similar cap hit as well. Scott Darling as well, similar cap hit for a low end starter. So this is the price that you're going to have to pay. Was the price going to skyrocket north of 5 million? I don't think so. Because this is what it costs for a guy that's, going to have one good year. But paying this after 27 games, worrisome, because you haven't seen his February, his March, his April. You haven't even seen what he's like in the playoffs. So, it's a high cap number. It's a bit of a risky deal. But just to kind of kibosh one of the rumors that are going out there, I know that Mark Spector had tweeted it out earlier before the press conference, saying that he had it on good authority that this deal was negotiated by Chiarelli and Koskinen's agent, Leto. But when Nicholson did his press conference afterwards, he said that was a group committee contract and that they were all on board with negotiating that number. So take that with what you will. But, the Koskinen signing, it's got its plus. That on the high side, it could be a great signing. But on the low side, it could be a very worrisome signing. And I think you got a lot of Oiler fans are kind of walking on eggshells around that deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point with Antti Raanta, last season he was incredible in Arizona.
Oh yeah.
He was playing out of his mind. I'm looking at his stats right now. His goals saved above average is what last season was almost 25. That's absolutely ridiculous. .930 save percentage, 2.24 goals against average. Antti Raanta's season last year in Arizona was fantastic. This season he's been riddled with injuries. He hasn't played since November. In the games that he's been playing, he's been kind of up and down. But again, he's been battling injuries, so I can't really blame him a lot for the few games that he's played this season. But I think for Antti Raanta's sake, that season last year was incredible in Arizona. With Koskinen, there is kind of, as you said, and you're totally right about this, that there is this kind of what side of Koskinen are we seeing in this game? And the biggest concern that I have with this deal is not the fact that Koskinen didn't deserve the contract, because he did, in my opinion at least. When he's on his game, like you said perfectly, he deserves a contract. But my biggest concern is the price tag, because at $4.5 million, right, for a goaltender that can't be a number one starter every game, from what you said, and they have, according to Cap Friendly, $50,000 in cap space. They have to sign Puljujärvi. Tobias Reeder's an RFA. Kyra's an RFA. You have Tyratties, I guess, is an RFA as well. And you have a couple of players that still need contracts, and you don't have the money to give to them. And also you have players on IR like Sakara, like Clefbaum, that, what are you going to do with them if you're not going to play them, right? And they take up a good chunk of the cap as well. Right now they're not, because they're on IR, but they either have to go back to the roster at some point or be moved. Sakara is making $5.5 million. Clefbaum is making a fantastic or just under $4.2 million until 2023, which, that's a fantastic contract for Oscar Clefbaum. That's very, very, very team friendly. And there's a cap problem. I don't know what they would do to fix it, because you have Milan Lucic, who scored like 3 goals in the past calendar year or whatever. He's not the same player, obviously, that we saw in Boston, and even the same player that we saw in the first year in Edmonton. He hasn't been the same. There's not a whole lot of leeway in terms of where these contracts can go. And to my knowledge, no one's taking Lucic's contract unless you package in the next 9 first-round draft picks. I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but no one's taking Lucic's contract without some sort of sweetener, unless Chiarelli gets hired by some other team, and then maybe he'll take Lucic's contract away. But if that doesn't happen, then Lucic is going to be an Oiler for 5 more years until 2023. Unless, of course, there's a buyout, which may be possible. I can't rule it out. but the Oilers are in cap hell right now, and to be honest, I don't know how they can get out of it. Do you have any idea as to what they could potentially even try to do to get at least some sort of cap relief right now anyway?
Yeah, well, it looks like for going into next year, they've got 70 million that's committed against the cap, and I believe that's for what, 13 players right now. And what's the cap supposed to rise to next year? I believe it's 83. So you're looking at about $13 million to sign another 10 players. Now, where the Oilers are going to get some of this cap relief from this year, you look at the 9 million or whatever that's going to be coming off the books for them. Getting rid of the Al Montoya contract that's buried in the minors, that's going to give you like 40 grand of a bit of a cap relief. But when you look at the bigger ones, you're looking at $4 million from Talbot that's going to be off the books. You're going to look at maybe Petrovic being walked as a UFA. Then you walk into some of the RFAs that might not get re-signed. Tyrati has been waived, sent down to AHL Bakersfield. He's likely not going to be coming back and signing another deal because Ratty wants to play in the NHL. And with the Oilers right now, with Hitchcock behind the bench, Hitchcock's not a Ratty fan. Ratty's not going to play here. Another guy that might go is Tobias Reeder. He hasn't exactly lived up to the two-way, contributing offensive forward that can also play on your PK, be a smart defensive player. He hasn't exactly delivered. He has also had some injury problems. So that's where you're going to get some more of that cap relief. So it's little things here and there that are going to give the Oilers a little bit of a flexibility going into next year. But where things really need to change is looking at this roster and saying, who are we going forward with? So you know that you've got Koskinen in the net. You know that you're going to come back next year with Klefbom, Nurse, Larson, Russell. Those are your guys that are definitives that are going to be coming back next year. Everyone else on that back end, when you look at, you got Manning, Petrovic, Benning, even Kevin Gravel. I like Kevin Gravel as a number 7. I like him being able to pinch in and play as a 6'7" defenseman. He's a decent defenseman that's got some size. He's got some mobility with a limited offensive upside, obviously. It's like a little bit limited to pretty much none, but he can move the puck for a guy that's a 6'7", and he's a reliable guy in that role. But what are you going to do with those other two spots? Because you do need to find another guy that can play in that top 4, because you can't have Chris Russell playing and being tasked with those top 4 minutes. You want Russell playing as a number 5. So going into next year, you need to figure out what's going to happen with this defense, because where is Anders Sekera going to fit as well? Because he's coming back later this year. He's a very touch and go situation. But if you can get Sekera back and get him up to a level where he can still contribute as a number 4 or a 5 defenseman, that's an addition in itself, because that's a piece that's been out of the Oilers' pie for the entire season. It's been out of the pie almost most of last year until later in the year as well. And by the time that Sekera was back, it was almost as if they brought him back too early. And so they were kind of starting to sit him. They were cutting his minutes back and whatnot as well. So you look at this defense, you've got to make an addition on the back end, but you've also got to clear out some of that dead cap space. So the contract issue that's going to happen is whoever comes in as the next GM, how are you going to find a way to maneuver out of $2.2 million for Brandon Manning, who's a number 7 defenseman? How are you going to find a way to shop Matt Benning, who probably doesn't really have as high as a value as some people might hope, but maybe Matt Benning can get you a mid-range prospect back, or he can get you a draft pick or 2 in the middle of the draft. That's another guy that can play as a third pairing puck-moving defenseman, maybe get some power play 2 time. Those are 2 guys that you got to find a way out of those contracts, because those are contracts that are ineffective for the Oilers right now. They're just not working, and the Oilers need to make a move. The tough sell up front, I'll just say one last thing here. The tough sell up front is getting out of that Lucic money, because as you said, you're lucky if you can get out of it, because it's such a hard sell. It's baffling that the Oilers even went as high as they did. It's baffling that there was even the teams that were searching for Lucic were still willing to go 6-7 years at the term that he got. I believe Vancouver and Montreal were two teams that were still in on this later in the year that were still rumored when Lucic was going to free agency. 6 times 6, that's a lot. 6 times 7, which is what the Oilers gave, and a no move clause. It's perplexing when you look at what aging curves suggest that for a power forward is usually done after the age of 32. But where Lucic is right now, his decline's already hit. His decline hit heavy in year 2. It's getting even worse in year 3, and you can't even imagine what it's going to be like next year in year 4. So you got $19 million that's due for Milan Lucic on July 1st. He gets 3 of that is a signing bonus that gets paid out to him, which drops the rest of the money to $16 million over the remaining 4 years. So that's the total of, approximately a team is paying, almost about $4 million. You can look it up on Cap Friendly exactly what the numbers are per year. Right. But when you look at the deal, a lot of it is structured towards performance bonus, and it's a way to get Lucic paid if there is a lockout. Great negotiating skill by his agent, but as far as the Oilers go here, it's a poor contract to have on the books, obviously, but the only way that you're going to be able to move that contract is if you retain 50% of that contract. And so that's going to be a $2 million cap hit that's going to be sitting on the Oilers' books for the next, 4 years. I'd much rather take the $2 million cap hit than to go through the buyout route, which is going to be a huge portion of buyout that hasn't even been factored in, that goes towards signing bonus that you have to pay out. And then the remaining cost of that is base salary. So it's going to be a high contract that's going to be on your books for 8 years, and you don't want that kind of dead cap space. $2 million on a short, $2 million for 4 years. Yeah, you can do that. But either one which way or the other, I do not believe that Lucic is going to be back next year. I think the Oilers are going to fully just move on from this deal, and it's either going to be by them retaining 50% of that contract and picking up another negative asset in return, or it's going to be by a buyout. That's going to be one of the uglier buyouts in the NHL's most recent history.
Well, to kind of piggyback off of that, 2 questions for you. One, there's going to be a new GM in town probably sooner rather than later while they figure out who it's going to be. In your opinion, who would be the best fit to fix this problem today and in the future? It could also be someone that we don't know about yet, because it could be a new face in the league. And one of the biggest gripes that I have with the league is they're I guess inaccessible. They don't want to hire anyone that hasn't been fired and rehired by half of the league. They besides Dubas in Toronto and Gorton in New York, you don't really have a whole lot of new faces in the league. And Edmonton, I mean, to this point, I could be wrong. Tomorrow they could hire someone new, and I could sound dumb. But right now, it doesn't feel like to me that they are going to hire a fresh face. It feels to me like they're going to hire someone that has already been around the block in the league to try to fix the ship. In your opinion, what name really stands out to you, at least if to fix the team, or a name that Edmonton is looking to hire? And also to piggyback off of what you said for the cap space, let's say you let a lot of these RFAs and UFAs walk. What you still need to fill that. You still need to fill the roster. So who are you going to bring in to play? Because you still need to, like you said, there's a lot of players that need to be signed, and there's not a whole lot of cap room. So who are you going to bring in to play? I mean, you can't bring up your entire AHL team to play. You're going to need to find somebody, some some players that are willing to take lesser contracts to play in Edmonton, which right now doesn't. I mean, I guess it seems better now than it did a week ago because Chiarelli's not there anymore. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're gonna have to find some really cheap contracts to fill out your depth, and it is probably harder than it sounds, and it sounds pretty difficult.
Yeah, so it's no easy task trying to turn the ship around, but. Is the Oilers firing Chiarelli? Isn't them just throwing up the white flag and saying that our season's over? You look at where the Oilers are right now in the standings. There's still hope here that they can turn it around and still be a playoff team here. And I think that Nicholson in his press conference was adamant about that as well. They believe that they can turn this around. And if you don't believe that you can turn this around when you're 3 points out of a playoff spot, you've got another issue that's going on here. Yes, the Oilers are 4-6 in their last 10 games. But the All-Star break and having Chiarelli fired at this time here, it's the perfect opportunity for this team to hit the reset button on their season. Take a bit of a break, get away from the rink, and then come back ready to go for the final half of the season. You look at where the Western Conference is trending, okay? So this is going to be a long, drawn-out answer here that I'm going to give you here, but I'm going to try to explain to you the situation that's going on here.
Sure.
You're 3 points out of the playoff right now. You're not going to hire a GM until the summer because it's just not going to happen right now. Too many teams are, they're gearing up for their they're gearing up for the final half of the season. They're getting all their pro scout meetings done. They're getting all their preparation done ahead of the trade deadline. A lot of these teams are in the playoff race, and so a lot of critical roster decisions and moves are going to have to get made in the next little while. So teams that are looking to maybe have an assistant GM that's available that might be able to be ready for an NHL job, they're not going to be as willing to let them go at this point of the season, right? So I'm going to come back to that in a second here with some of the names that are going to get mentioned. Now, you see where this is going here. You're 3 points out. The Western Conference final wild card spot to get into the playoffs today is projected to be 85 points in the West. Okay.
Wow.
Now, I know it's a low number, okay, but the reason why it's so low is because you have a lot of parity. You've got 5 teams that have essentially separated themselves in Winnipeg, Nashville, Calgary, San Jose, and Vegas, okay? Those are the teams that have completely separated themselves from the pack. And then you've got anywhere from Minnesota, Dallas, Colorado, Vancouver, Anaheim, Arizona, St. Louis, and Edmonton. You've got all those teams that are within 3, 4, 5 points, 6 points of each other, okay? That's a huge variance from dropping you from being 6th in the Western Conference all the way down to 13th. So there's a huge parity. So a lot of these teams are still in it. So teams are not going to be as willing to kind of make their own moves at the head of the table here in their hockey ops because they're all still in it. Going down the rest of the way here, you look at that fact that I gave you that number 85, okay? Admittedly, that's a low number right now, and obviously I believe that as the year goes on, teams fall out of the race, and that maybe that number rises a little bit. So if it's going to 85 points, the Oilers need to make up 36 points the rest of the way to get to 86, and that should get them into the playoffs. That means that you have to go 18, 14, and 0 the rest of the way. Now, let's go with the other theory here that number is going to creep back up because some of these teams are going to fall out of the race. Okay, it just happens every year. Let's say the number is 90. Okay, if you get to 90, that means the Oilers got to make up 41 points the rest of the way. That's going 20, 11, and 1. Okay, we've seen what this team was able to do at one point, going on that 9-2-1 run. This team does have a high side when everyone buys in and the fatigue factor is out and this team is mentally focused on winning hockey games. They're going 12, 11, and 1 the rest of the way isn't an unconceivable task here for the Oilers. It's it's not a task that's not gonna happen for this team. Like they can do this. Even going 18, 14, and 0, you're just playing a little bit above 500. That's all you got to do the rest of the way. Win 2 games, lose 1. Win 2 games, lose 1. And then you can get yourselves into a playoff spot by that. It's just going to be a lot of buying in and seeing how this team faces adversity going forward into the offseason. or going down the final 32 games of the season, I should say. Where this team gets to is going to be another check mark or a checkpoint in the road, probably just a week to 2 weeks before the trade deadline. That's when you're going to know if the Oilers are going to be sellers or if they're going to be buyers. If they're still in this race the way that they are right now, the Oilers are not going to be sellers. You look at Alex Chason, a guy that could be someone that could get them a decent return because he's on one of the best contracts in the league, and he's been scoring. He's been one of the Oilers' best scoring forwards this year. High shooting percentage aside. You look at some of these guys that the Oilers have that they could eventually ship out, you might see some minor tinkering, okay? Like just in the final spots, I could see the Oilers, if they're still in the race, actually becoming buyers without actually doing anything that could significantly hurt this franchise in the long term, like dealing a first-round pick. So that's going to be put onto Gretzky and Nicholson to get these guys through to the end of the year, be within a spot where they can compete for the playoff spot without doing anything that's going to jeopardize the long-term future of this franchise. As soon as April comes around and teams know that they can start making some changes in their hockey ops, that's when you're going to see Nicholson go back with the list that he's already probably got, a short list of guys that are on his list and guys that he thinks that can run this club. I've got this down to 5 names. Okay. So at that point here, we get to April. The Oilers, whatever happens in the playoffs happens. Okay. If Keith Gretzky turns this around and gets this club into the playoffs, does some minor moves to maneuver his way around the cap and get this team set up, it's then going to be his idea then to sell where he thinks that he can get this team and what his plan is to turn this around. If he can turn this around with his plan and say that, this is what I'm going to do, and Nicholson and the higher ups and the Oilers brain trust buy into that plan, Gretzky could be the guy realistically that could take over. Okay. Now you look at Gretzky's past with his drafting, he's done fairly well for himself. This is a guy that was in Arizona when they drafted Turris, Bodker, Domingo, and even Connor Murphy, right? Then you go to Boston. When he was in Boston, he was a big proponent and a big piece in them drafting Pasternak, Donato, Heinen, Bjork, DeBrusk, Brandon Carlo, Forsbacka Carlson, and Jeremy Lauzon. So some of these names that are on that list for the Bruins are already paying dividends for them. So when you look at Gretzky, you know that he can draft. You know that he's got an eye to address talent, which is something else that Nicholson mentioned in his press conference, that he wants a guy that knows talent, because the last guy that was in that spot, he's out of touch. He lost that eye for the talent that he had in the past that made him a Stanley Cup contender. So Gretzky could realistically be a guy. Another guy that I think that you're hearing a lot of right now is Kelly McCrimmon, who's the assistant GM in Vegas right now. Played a big part with George McPhee of getting that Vegas club up and running coming out of that expansion draft. And so now that there's a potential that he's either going to end up in Edmonton or he's going to end up with the Seattle job.
Sorry, I cut you off for a second here. I know Darren Dreger was talking a lot about that in the intermission of the Caps game yesterday. He was talking about that on NBCSN as I was watching the game during the intermission. He was talking about how Kelly is one of the biggest names that could potentially replace Chiarelli for new GM. Yeah,
he's one of the biggest names that are out there right now. I think if you go along, any real hockey mind will tell you that Kelly McCrimmon on his body of work, 3 decades in Brandon, then transitioning towards the NHL, and what his limited resume has shown and what he's done in Vegas already, and helping get that franchise up and running. He's going to be a front runner for this job. Another guy that I think is going to be a front runner for this job, and probably a guy that's going to be one of my personal favorites that I think that could probably do this as well, is going to be Mark Hunter. Hunter, obviously, as everybody knows, lost out to Dubas for the job in Toronto, but was an integral part of turning around that talent pool. Now you look at where he's going right now. He's doing some work with the London Knights and whatnot there. Him getting back into the NHL and getting into a GM chair especially with someone, you're looking at a spot where you're staring down the barrel and you got Connor McDavid on your roster. That's something that's going to be an enviable spot for a lot of GMs. The most unenviable part about all of this is just trying to clean up the cap catastrophe that's going on around McDavid. But if there's one guy that will be able to turn this around with just actually building depth in this organization, it might be Mark Hunter. And once again, these are guys that, as you were mentioning earlier, and I was talking to Jim Parsons about this yesterday on the Hockey Writers podcast, about just some of these guys that are going to be getting spots are in the NHL as GMs are guys that haven't had spots yet. And they're lesser known guys that maybe have some fresh ideas and some new perspectives on how you need to build a team in today's NHL. But they just haven't had the opportunity yet. And I think that the Oilers, you went with Chiarelli in the past, who had won a Stanley Cup, and that was your selling feature. But I think this time around, they're going to be a little bit more open-minded. Another guy here, I'll quickly rattle off the last two. Okay, you got Ron Hextall. Another guy did a decent job building a talent pool in Philadelphia, but was just too patient overall, and that cost him his job. Another guy, Ken Holland in Detroit. Okay, so you got Ken Holland in Detroit. He built a contender for a long time there, but just now they're going through the rebuild in Detroit. They're acquiring talent and they're turning things around. They're going to be on the upswing in a few years, but it's going to be a little while. But he's served there for so long, in over 20 years. I think it's going to be a time where Holland's eventually going to be ushered out, and maybe that they end up going with Yzerman. The one name that I'm going to say that I don't see coming to Edmonton is Yzerman, just because of the fact that I think that Yzerman is. So we're sitting in the wings, no pun intended, for that job in Detroit eventually. So.
Well, with Chiarelli, right, and also, by the way, with Drager, in yesterday's game, he mentioned two names, one being Kelly McCrimmon and two being Mark Hunter. So I mean, I don't know if you watched, you're up in Canada, so I'm not sure if you got that broadcast, but he basically echoed what you said. I mean, what you said and what he said basically were the same thing, in that both could be great potential GMs up in Edmonton. Chiarelli, I got this off of a Sportsnet article that was posted yesterday. Chiarelli's record in Edmonton: 137 wins, 133 losses, and 26 losses in overtime/shootout. 24th best in the league. Goals per game: 2.74, 20th in the league. Goals against per game: 2.95, 26th in the league. Save percentage: .905, 25th in the league. Penalty kill: 79.1, 27th in the league. I mean, obviously some of these were, I would assume, cherry picked because the power play's not on there, and there's some other stats that aren't on there. So, but this is a good highlight as to the not so great aspects of Peter Chiarelli's tenure in Edmonton. Of course, I thought originally to mention some of the trades that Chiarelli did in Edmonton and all that, but we know. I mean, we know at this point what the terrible trades are. I mean, the first trade he made was for Griffin Reinhart, and that trade was so bad. I mean, in retrospect, obviously, it's terrible. I mean, they traded a first and a second round pick for Griffin Reinhart. First round pick ended up being Matthew Barzal. Would they have drafted him? I mean, that remains to be seen. But there's a lot of talent up on the board at that point. But I guess if you're Peter Chiarelli, the idea is that, okay, Griffin Reinhart was a first round pick just a couple of years prior, and he's still young. There's still a lot of room for him to improve. Maybe there's a steal. Did not end up being a steal, and then the Vegas Golden Knights, who I thought should have drafted Kyra. I really thought, and in my draft, my expansion draft kind of skeleton that I think either Cap Friendly or one of these sites had, I had Kyra going to Vegas every time instead of Griffin Reinhart, and I guess they took a flyer on him and it didn't work for Vegas either. And you could talk about the 1-for-1s, and there's a list of not great trades. One trade though that I thought was pretty good in retrospect was Zach Cassian going to Edmonton and Montreal getting Ben Scrivens. Scrivens is no longer playing in the NHL, not even North America last time I checked. So I mean, I guess not every trade has been terrible, but the trades that have been terrible, oh boy, have they been pretty awful. But I mean, again, we've talked a little bit about Ryan Strome and Spooner and Eberle, and we could say the same thing that everyone else is saying. The trades aren't great, and there's no real point to rag on them even more because, I mean, what can we say that hasn't already been said 1,000 times? I mean, these trades have been terrible, and Chiarelli deservedly, I think, deserve to not be the general manager in Edmonton anymore. I remember there was I talked about this a couple of weeks ago as well. I remember this quote very specifically from Behind the Bruins. There's this clip on Twitter that right before the Sagan trade in 2011, and it was Chiarelli and a bunch of other guys. I'm assuming management. They were all in this room with a long table, and they were talking about how Sagan didn't meet the culture of the Boston Bruins, whatever that meant. And then he got traded for a bunch of nothing, half a sandwich, a piece of burnt toast, and a ripped up notebook. So the questionable trades that Chiarelli has made goes pretty far back. But again, there's no real reason to talk about it more, again, because it's old news at this point. I mean, we've said so many things about the Chiarelli trades that it's a lot of them are dumb, and that's really all. That's really it. We could say the same things that we've said, that other people have said. The trades were bad. A lot of the trades were terrible. There's a couple of, I guess, okay ones, like Zach Cassian trade, but overall, his trade, I feel like if he played at NHL 19 for a little bit and kind of and maybe learned a little bit from there in terms of trade value. I mean, I feel like at least some of these trades wouldn't have been as bad, but at least in terms of figuring out trade value, Chiarelli is not great at. And for Edmonton, I feel like they finally got some relief in that he is no longer the general manager of the Oilers. And the poll question of the day, which I tweeted out earlier today. If you want to vote in the poll and if you want to tweet at the poll, it's on Twitter at Chel Squared. The poll question is: which of these options is most likely to happen first in Edmonton? Now, Shane, I'm going to read you the four choices, and I want you to tell me which one you picked before I tell you which of the four is in the lead. Now, the four choices are: first one, smart general manager is hired. Second one, 97 being Connor McDavid gets offensive help. Number 3, Talbot gets traded. Number 4, tank. Shane, which one did you pick?
I went with that there's going to be 97 getting some offensive help. The reason being is just that obviously we went over this earlier. The GM is not going to get hired until the off season, so we're looking at early April that a GM move is going to happen. As far as tank happens, you're not looking to tank because you're within 3 points of a playoff spot. So as far as that goes, that's going to be at the back end of this. You want to still get into the playoff spot here in a tight Western Conference where you can still do this. You just got to hit the reset button. As far as a Talbot trade goes, now this is the thing. Okay, it's tied into the whole where this team is as they get into the playoffs, because the Oilers don't have a guy in the farm system that can come up and jump into that number 2 spot behind Koskinen right now. They just don't have that. So they're going to have to go out and have to find someone. Well, in the meantime here, if you're willing to bet that this team can bounce back once they get Oscar Klefbom and they get Sekera back, that you might not need to tank, And you also might not need to trade Talbot because you're going to get better goaltending because of the sheer fact that your defense is going to be able to improve. You're going to be clearing out those net front issues. You're going to get rid of those loose pucks that are going to be on rebound. You're going to be winning more battles in front of the net and making it easier for your goalies to make saves. So is it easier to go with the double that you know or the double that you don't know? As far as what's out there in the goalie market right now, there's not a whole lot. And then the guys that you're going to be going after, you're not going to go after Jimmy Howard or Bobrovsky because those guys are going to cost you an arm and a leg. And the Oilers aren't in a position that they are going to give up an arm and a leg to get either of those guys. So what are you down to? You're looking at maybe Curtis McElhinney to jump in. That might be a move. But I think in the meantime, that Talbot trade's not going to happen anytime soon. As long as this team's in a position to get to get into a playoff spot. With 97 getting some offensive help, there's some guys that are rumored to be available right now that are tied to the Oilers. Some of the rumors have been kiboshed, but then there's still a little bit of smoke there. Andrei Burakovsky is in Washington right now. Young offensive forward, plays the wing, can play up and down within your top nine. He's a scoring forward that just hasn't lived up and has had a really rough year this year. And he's a guy that might need a change of scenery. Burakovsky as well. The hard thing with him is the qualifying offer for next year because he's already making close to $3 million this year. So his next qualifying offer has got to be around the same dollar figure. So that's a high amount of dollars if this guy is only going to be a third line scoring forward going forward. Another guy here that I've got a ton of interest in is Andrei Athanasiou in Detroit. He's making just over $3 million, 2 years remaining on his contract, and he's on pace to get near the 30-goal mark. This guy's a fast forward, and he's decent defensively as well. He's creative. He's a guy that could be able to play, that you could sit next to McDavid, and you can let those two guys just fly, and they'd probably be even with Milan Lucic on that line, if you were to pull Lucic from the second or the fourth line and actually plop him on that line, it would still be the fastest line in the NHL. The ability to maybe even put McDavid and Athanasiou together is something that I think a lot of Oilers fans would be excited to see. It's just going to come down to what the cost is. Okay, from what I understand in talking to some of my sources in Detroit. It sounds as if Detroit's going to want a defenseman back for Athanasiou if they even are truly going to be shopping him. And at the high side of that, that's where you end up looking at what the Oilers have on defense. And I'll tell you, matter of factly, Matt Benning's not going to get you. Matt Benning in a draft pick is not going to get you Andrei Athanasiou.
Sure, I would think so. I feel like Detroit kind of values AA more than Matt Benning in a draft pick, but I mean, yeah. So Kenny Holland has had a couple of questionable moves in the past couple of years, so I guess time will tell. But I would hope, at least for Detroit's sake, that they put in more value towards Andrei Athanasiou.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're not gonna trade Athanasiou for a 5'6" one-dimensional power play defenseman. You're gonna want someone like Evan Bouchard, who's a complete non-starter, okay, and that's the Oilers' best defense prospect. And then after that, you've got Caleb Jones, okay. Caleb Jones is gonna be one of those guys that can step in. He's into the NHL next year. He just needs a little bit more seasoning. He had a really good start when he did get up into the Oilers lineup this year. There was times when he was playing 23 minutes a night, and he was delivering in those 23 minutes. So with Caleb Jones, the Oilers have a player here. The other guy here is Ethan Bear. Now, I could see potentially of these three, the guy that ends up going is Ethan Bear. And Ethan Bear could be a selling point as well because he's got an offensive game. He's got a cannon. He can man a power play. He did that in junior with Everett. He's been doing that with Bakersfield. Some of his concussion and his hip issues are behind him right now, and he's starting to sort of show some bounce back. And so that could be a prospect that the Oilers, when you look at this whole thing of what they have coming on their back end, I could potentially see the Oilers dealing Ethan Bear and a decent draft pick. We may be looking at a second or a third round pick going back the other way to potentially get the Athanasiou talks going. It's just going to come down to cost and seeing what the Oilers have. That's something that has positive value. And right now, that's the hard thing, is that they don't have a whole lot of positive value that they can sell out.
97 getting offensive help, by the way, the third highest option of the poll. The poll got over 100 votes. Smart GM is hired, dead last at 9%. 97 getting offensive help is second dead last with 17%. Talbot gets traded is the highest right now with 41%, and Tank is at second with 33% on the vote. For Cam Talbot, really quickly here before I let you go, last question here. For Cam Talbot, what is his value right now on the trade market? And if he were to walk in July, what kind of contract would he get? Because again, like you said, he hasn't been playing well. I mean, he has a history of playing well when he's confident, when he's on his game. But as you said, his confidence right now is shot, and therefore he's not playing well. So looking at all the factors, what kind of value can Cam Talbot get for either the Oilers if they were to pursue a trade for him, or if they let him go and he's pursuing a contract elsewhere? What kind of contract would he get from a team?
That's a tough one, because, you look at where Cam is right now, and, it's the wheels have really fallen off the bus. And I think there's a lot of Oiler fans that won't really say a lot of bad things about Cam Talbot, just because he's a quality person. And just the fact that we all really hoped that trade was going to work out. And then you look at 16-17. If you take Connor McDavid out of the picture, Cam Talbot was that team's MVP. The reason why that team got to Game 7 of the second round and got within one win of getting to the Western Conference Final, that was because of Cam Talbot. That guy stood on his freaking head in that season and all throughout the playoff that year. And so the drop off, it's concerning. But you know what? It's one of those things where I think that a lot of people, you can see a bit of a bounce back with Talbot, because he was a good goalie with the Rangers. He was a good goalie early on with the Oilers. And then over the last 2 years, something has happened. So maybe there's something going on outside of the rink that we're just not discussing, that it should be anyone's business. But, there's some confidence issues here. Just the fact the team's not winning, it's become a losing culture around him. And maybe this is just a guy that just needs a new change of scenery. Now, going into the offseason, is Cam Talbot going to be getting a starter's job? Likely not. You look at some of the spots where he could potentially land. You could be looking at him maybe getting a spot where he could be like a 1B that can come in and play 40 games for you. Or, very similar to what the league has with Brian Elliott, like a guy that can come in, give you some quality starts, but he's not going to be a starter for you. There's a chance that Talbot could end up in that role, but I see him just, generally speaking, he's going to get a backup job somewhere in the league. And you know what? He might not get anywhere close to the $4 million that he's going to get, but I could suspect that he'll get something in the mid twos going into next season. It's going to be there's going to be a ton of backup spots that are going to be opening up this year, and I just think that Talbot in himself, he's not done. Right. The last 2 years, just in what itself, I'm just going to chalk it up to a confidence issue, and the guy just needing a change of scenery. There's a quality goalie with Cam Talbot, and I'm in that camp. But where his play is at right now, and how things are trending, I don't think that the Oilers are going to get a positive, get anything that's a real significant value in return for him right now. It's just not going to happen. You might be looking at maybe potentially getting at the trade deadline, if the Oilers are truly out of it and they are going to shop Talbot, or if maybe I'm completely wrong and they are just going to get rid of him one which way or the other. I think that Talbot's going to get you like a mid-range draft pick is what it's going to be. It's going to be anything sexy that you're going to be able to really sell to anyone, but it's going to be an asset in return. But you know what? More importantly, though, it gets him a fresh start somewhere else, right? But as long as the Oilers are in it, and if it's me, I think that you're going to see Talbot here until until the deadline and maybe past the deadline as long as they're still in it.
I think, now this might be a little out of left field, but stop me if I'm being overly ambitious here. But you take a look at the Vancouver Canucks. They have Thatcher Demko, who's in the works to be their starting goaltender. In my opinion, Markstrom is not a backup goaltender. Anders Nielsen, not good enough in Vancouver to be a backup goaltender. I think Cam Talbot would fit very well in Vancouver, at least up until Demko reaches starter status. If Cam Talbot could play 30, 35 games in Vancouver while Demko is gearing up to be the eventual starter, maybe potentially an elite starter if he ever meets that potential. But I do think Cam Talbot would fit very well in Vancouver. One, he gets to change scenery. Two, I mean, I feel like he would perform very well there because one, he has something to prove, right? Because this season hasn't gone well for him at all. This new sort of start in Vancouver could potentially be very good for him. And two, he has an opportunity to show the league that, hey, I'm still a decent option in net if you need somebody. And it could be a 1 or a 2 year deal. You give him, like you said, a $2 million deal or whatever. And you play him as the backup to Thatcher Demko. I feel like he would be very successful in his newfound role in Vancouver, kind of carrying the load a little bit for Demko while he's still gearing up to be their next starter.
Yeah, as far as Talbot going to Vancouver, I just don't see the mix. I just don't see the fit there. It's just because you've got another year of Markstrom, and Markstrom and what the Canucks have right now. Inconsistent starting number one goalie. Someone that's pretty much like a 1A, 1B type, very similar to what you're going to get with Talbot at the very high end of what Talbot is. But Markstrom in itself, he's there for another year. He's still 28. He's going to be 29 next season. He's been around the league enough that and the way that he does play right now, that he can split those starts with Thatcher Demko. And I don't exactly think that the Canucks are just going to throw Thatcher Demko right into the deep end and expect him to start playing 50, 60 games next year either.
Sure.
I think you're going to see a split between Markstrom and Demko. The reason why Vancouver got rid of Nielsen when they did was because, Demko is proving to be NHL ready at that point. But I just don't think that he's number one goalie NHL ready just yet. But he's gonna split the starts, and you already have someone that's there at $3.6 million. You don't have a whole lot of cap issues in Vancouver, so moving Markstrom just for the sake of signing Talbot in the offseason, just doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of appeal there. And from what it sounds like, the Vancouver teammates, they really like Markstrom, and he is liked in the marketplace. So I just don't see a fit being there. As far as fits for Talbot, you might be looking at Carolina, Columbus, New Jersey, Florida, Detroit if they offload Howard. You could also be looking at the Islanders potentially being a match for him as well. Ottawa is going to be looking for a goalie soon. Philadelphia is always looking for a goalie.
That's very true.
And then you've got Chicago has got to sort out their situation as well. You're going to go down the list here, and St. Louis, they need some better goaltending as well. And then I think that's pretty much where we're sitting here right now. Is that there are some options for Talbot to get a job, and he's going to get a job. He's a good goaltender. He's just had 2 really bad back-to-back years, and his confidence is gone, and he just needs a fresh start. But Cam Talbot might end up being next year, probably one of the what do they call it? The guy that just has a bounce back year and just becomes one of the most unsung heroes of the season next year. There's the entire possibility of that happening.
It's very true. Shane, thank you so much for coming on, talking to me about some Oilers. A lot to talk about as this show has been over an hour and 10 minutes. So we went through a lot with the Edmonton kind of circus fiasco. There's a lot going on in Edmonton. I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time and talking to me about the Oilers. Tell people where they can follow you on social media.
So you can follow me on Twitter. That's the only thing that I've really got going on right now as far as social media. You can follow me at Sander EDM at just on Twitter there. I tweet regularly. It's usually Oilers content. And what I've been kind of talking about the last little while mainly is kind of where I've been looking as prospects and just where the Oilers are going with their system and whatnot. So if you want to keep in touch with what's going on with their prospects and kind of some of my opinions on where this organization needs to go, that's where you can find me, Sander EDM, at just on Twitter there. But as far as getting back into the writing chair, I was writing at the Hockey Writers for about 5 years or so, just taking a little bit of a break right now just to kind of recharge. But, I'm kind of expecting to maybe get back into the writing chair maybe sometime in the summer or the next season when things kind of come around. So, for anyone that's listening today that follows my writing and whatnot, I appreciate the kind words that you guys have given me. But yeah, I'm not gone for good. I will be back soon. I'm just going to take some time to relax and recharge. So anyways, yeah, Andrew, thanks for having me. And let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime you want to come on, talk to me about some hockey, I'm very willing to crack the mic and record something with you. Really appreciate you coming on, and I'll talk to you again real soon.
All right, awesome. Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Shane. This has been episode number 32 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chiarelli. Episode number 33 coming up next Thursday. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.